Hi, I'm Marcos, and welcome to the Coming to the Faith podcast. In this episode, I'm really excited because I'm interviewing someone who's near and dear to my heart, and she unpacks her journey of not only coming to the faith, but what her walk has been like throughout this process at a very young age of 13 years old. In this episode, we're going to be talking to Castano. I pray that you are blessed, encouraged. Thank you for watching. Caitlin, thank you so much for being here. This is one interview that I have been looking forward to. Your brain is one that I'm fascinated by. You definitely have unique perspectives. We've spoken at great lengths a lot of the makeup of who you are and your journey, what's led you to this place. So with that being said, thank you for being here. But now, let's unpack who Caitlin is.
Well, I'm Caitlin. I am an enigma to myself, if I'm being really honest. But okay. I think that if you want to, that's such a loaded question. But the simple is, I'm Caitlin. I grew up in a typical family dynamic, nothing crazy, nothing outrageous. I was an only child. I am an only child. And I always was around church. I was always around those dynamics. My parents were always involved in that. I come from, my parents' background is they got saved and they went to YWAM. They went to Youth with a Mission, and they spent some time there. They did their initial internship, and then they were on staff for a while. And so the DNA of that kind of lifestyle is always been what I've been around. If it wasn't listening to them tell their stories, it was meeting their friends that were really like family. It was unique. I'd meet people that they hadn't seen in like 15 years, and it was instantly like it was family. And that was the history that they had with those people. And so I always grew up in those dynamics. And so I always had that around me growing up. It was without fail. Ministry life was a big part of my childhood. And it's a big part of who I am today. And so on that side of like, who am I? What do I do? Whatever, everything has been always very ministry focused. Apart from that, I think I'm pretty normal. Okay. I think I'm a pretty typical 27-year-old. I think that I've got my friends and I've got my interests and I've got my things, but overall, who is Caitlin? I don't think I'm that much different than anybody else. I don't stand out that much. From my perspective, right?
Okay.
Typical, what do you think a typical 27-year-old is? And then you have Caitlin.
Okay.
Falls right into it.
Yeah, because 10 years ago, I was 27, so I can testify that you are a different 27-year-old. And this is not because you're sitting in front of me. You're not this outline cookie cutter of this is what a 27-year-old female.
Oh, I try to be.
But it's not your makeup. It's not who you are. And because I know a lot about what you've shared based on your background, not only culturally, but ministry, family life. You and I at great lengths have discussed different parallels and similarities that we share. We have the running joke of, hey, brother from another mother, sister from another, like there's the similarity.
It's eerie.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. But the one thing that one of the many things I love discussing with you and I love unpacking with you is we both grew up in the faith. This is what you've known. You just said it. Your parents were in YWAM. Yeah. That's a international Christian ministry, and this is what you've been exposed to and around for your life. This is what we know. We don't have this like, oh yeah, we came out of whatever. No, you were born into this.
Yeah.
The perspective I like talking to you about a lot, and it's not even like, oh, I'm giving you the dirty secrets, but it's just because, like yourself, I'm not the son of a leader, and I'm not the son of, you know what I mean? But they were
Yeah.
always the people that I hung around
Yeah.
with. I had access to their lives, not to say that I was a part of their world, but I had access to it.
Yeah.
Your perspective as the only child, as a female, and as someone who is involved in the very ministry in which both her parents are a part of the leadership in.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like, so as much as you're comfortable sharing, I'd like to unpack a little bit of what that journey looks like. Because like I said, you were born into this. So you said who Caitlin was. But leading you to the decision, because this is what the whole point of this is, how did you come to the faith?
Mm-hmm.
What led you to that point?
Yeah.
Just because you're born in this doesn't mean you're saved.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
So unpack a little bit of that. What does that journey look like? Childhood into adolescence into now 27-year-old Caitlin, filled with the Holy Spirit, pursuing the heart of the Lord, and just what does that journey look like for you? What is the leading point to that?
Yeah.
What are marking points that you're comfortable sharing that have led you to the position, the place you're in now?
Yeah. So if I had to sum that up into one word, it was messy and it was hard. That's 2 words. But I think looking back, I go, and that's such a crazy reality for me, is that I look back at my life and I remember living it. And as I was living it, I felt like nothing was changing, in the sense that, like, yeah, I was growing, but I was always me. And now I'm not sure what it is about the latter half of my 20s, but I definitely have a feeling of, I look back now. It's not so much like there's a distinct part and season of my life that I can look back on. And that's brought a different perspective for me when I am asked that question, because it's no longer something that I feel like I'm living. I feel like growing up was something that I lived up until like I was like 25. I was still growing up. So I was talking about an experience that was still happening. And now I've come to a place where, no, I'm not fully cooked. I don't think I'll ever be fully cooked, but I'm definitely looking back at something. And when I do that, look back, when I go backwards, I think that I was always a really unique child, in the sense that I never liked the things that my peers enjoyed. I was never, and that's not to say that I was completely on the odd man out. There was common interests, obviously, that I had growing up in the same culture and the same whatever, but it was always unique. You know, my friends in school would invite their friends from school to their birthday parties. I wouldn't. I would invite the people from church. My friends in school would go out with each other and do things with each other. I wouldn't. I had this community of church. But in that community of church, I still didn't feel like I fit there. And so I had this really bizarre dichotomy where it didn't matter where I went, I didn't quite fit the mold. I didn't quite make it there. And so I was always and I had friends and I had people that I hung out with, that I really, really young had play dates with, birthday parties, later turned into, hang out, let's go to the movies together. I had that. I don't want to paint the picture that I was completely socially on my own, but I definitely lacked the connection that they all also had with each other. I was never very girly, still not, but that never was the case. And so I would connect with the girls I was around to a degree. But I'm obviously not, I also was never really sporty. So it's not like I was the girl that was like, forget the cheerleaders, I'm going to go play football. It wasn't that either. So I had this weird in between. And I look back and I see that as the Lord. The Lord definitely had me separated from the beginning of my life. And I can't deny that. And I resented it as a child. I resented it a lot. Because I was the odd man out. Because I didn't have friends that I felt like were my friends. And so I was angry a lot as a kid. A lot of my emotions would come out as anger. And that brought on its own challenges at home. Super normal family dynamic. But my dad was a flight attendant. He was a flight attendant for Continental Airlines that then turned into United, and he's still flying. And he got that job at the beginning of 1997, and I was born in 1997. So my whole life, all I knew my dad to be was a flight attendant. And so that meant there was days at a time that he was outside of the home. And it was just me and my mom. And that had its own challenges because, as I grew, my personality changed. I've always had a very strong personality too. So my mom and I would bump heads a lot. And so the emotions I would feel outside of the home would play into this dynamic inside the home. And it would usually, but I also didn't make those connections when I was younger. So it's not like I could, 12-year-old Caitlin's not telling my mom, like, I'm having these angry moments, and it's because I feel so displaced everywhere I go. I can't connect that as a kid. So it's just this really bizarre enigma. And I spent a lot of time with my mom and my mom's friends. And then as I got older, I spent a lot of time with older people. You're one of my closest friends, and you just pointed out that you're 10 years my senior. And so I've carried that. I've carried that pattern, right? Always. It was always the case with me. And that was a bizarre dynamic because I also had really, I'll never forget, I was maybe 13, and I was at youth group, and I had this idea. Pastor Gary had already started cultivating the idea of the house of prayer, of the prayer room, and Harpam, what all that looked like. And I'll never forget, I went up to, and I wasn't necessarily walking with the Lord either, because though I couldn't make deep connections as to where my emotional turmoil was coming from, I was able to, at the very least, blame God. And that's interesting. No idea where all this is coming from, but I have no issue at such a young age turning it on him. And so I wasn't necessarily walking with the Lord, but being in church, that was what I knew. That was just what I did. And so I had this idea, and I remember going up to a bunch of my friends and being like, wouldn't it be really awesome if we did a set and it was just like the kids? And they all had this like diabolical reaction to me. They all were like, no, why would we want to do that? And I was like, okay, so I don't know how to connect with you on a social level. I don't really like God, but that's why we're all here, and we're all here together, but you don't.
You're trying to bridge a gap.
And nothing. And so I was like, but that was a real longing too. So strange. There's like all these different things happening internally. And it's like I have this real longing. I have this real desire to seek the Lord with my peers. I have a desire to connect with my peers. And I have a desire to not be at odds at home. But I have no idea how to make any of these things work together because I don't connect with my peers. My mom makes me mad because she fights with me all the time because I'm a strong-headed 15-year-old, 12-year-old, whatever. And I'm actually kind of upset with the Lord because he made me like this and I stick out so much. And that carried into my teen years. But we left the church that I grew up in. And that was like whatever little bit of a glass house was still up there. That was like a wrecking ball right through that. Because now any connection that I've found here, you're now taking away from me. Now we're going to go do this great big new thing. Now we're going to go do the house of prayer. And I had so many questions as a leader's kid. Why does that mean I have to leave everything? It's actually it's funny because I remember certain people that were involved in my old church that were around. And I remember my mom I don't like change as it is. On top of everything else, I don't like change.
Me either.
And so I remember when we were gearing up for it and I was having a real hard time with it. And I was kind of being like, what? I was asking questions. I was like, is it farther? Like, why are we doing that? Is it closer to home? Are we going to be more involved? Like, I kind of was like, why? Why are we doing this? And my mom started to list off people she's like, but they're still going to be in the worship team and they're still going to be a part of it and they're still going to do it. And I was like, yeah, I still don't understand why we need to do all this. Like, I still don't get all this. And so whatever issues I was having, whatever questions I had, this move just solidified that. But before we did that, I want to say 5 years before we did that, I was like 7. We went to church Sunday morning and We went home, and then we went back to church. And I was offended by that because why are we going back to church? And my mom looked me square in the face. I'll never forget. We were outside of the church, and she went, "You will do this. And I don't know what it'll look like, but you will do this." And I was like, "What is this?" She was like, "Well, right now it's coming back on Sunday." And I was like, "Okay." And she was like, "And you will do this until you're 18 because I said so." And I was like, "Okay." And at 7, I was very much like, who the heck do you think you are? Tell me what I'm. But she was my mother. She was exactly the person to do it. And so that's what we did. And so you fast back forward, we're moving to this new thing. And that is what this was. And so she pulled that back at me. And she was like, "Well, remember," which at this point, I think I was 12, 13. I was right in that window. And I remember her going, "Remember what I told you about the Sunday thing, that we were going to do this until you're 18? This is the same thing." And she got to a point where it was like, "You're doing this. You will do this until you're 18 because I said so." And I was like, got it.
So like a refresher almost.
Yep.
Like
Literally.
I said it at 7.
I'm saying it again at 12. And I said, okay. I was like, I'll make this easy because I had a really good ability at making my mom's life miserable when I wanted to.
We joke around constantly, but it's quite literally the love, compassion, and mercy of God that you were given to Jen and I was given to Roosevelt.
It is because
a space in which a Caitlin and a Marcos would have existed would have been chaotic for either one of our parents.
And I was a little lawyer. And I'm only 5 feet tall now, Marcos. I was only like 3 feet tall at the time, but I was a little mini lawyer and I held my court and I held my side too. And so I remember hitting a moment where I wanted to make it easy on my mom because at the same time, my parents this was the church that they got saved in. This was the church that they were sent to YWAM from and received by when they got back. This was the church that they got married in. This was the church that I was born into and I was dedicated in. So there was a sentimental piece for it. Wasn't just like, yeah, we're making this shift now. There was a clear leading of the Lord on their part, and I was able to perceive that clear leading of the Lord, I need not make this worse. I need not make this harder for them. And so I remember kind of making a deal with her, and I was like, fine, I'll go. But can I just keep coming to my youth group here? By that point, I had made more friends. I was a little bit older. I had made connections. I had found more interest. And I was happy there. So I did do a very much like, let me just keep going. And my mom was like, okay. So on Sundays, I went to the new church. And on Fridays, I went to the old one. And boy, you didn't have to know that I was upset to be where I was on Sunday to know that I was upset to be there. It was all over my demeanor. I could not, I did it because I cooperated, but you could tell that I didn't want to be there. And my involvement in the other youth group, I was growing and I was on the worship team now. I was kind of growing in all of that and I was happy. I had friends, I had real connection. Becoming a part of the worship team kind of tipped its hat at that desire that I had way back when. And it wasn't the same. I wasn't doing a prayer set with them, but I was finding my way in music. I was finding that I was a musician. I was learning that all those pent-up emotions that I battled with, they actually had a space to come out now. And I was learning that. Mm-hmm. And so I was happy there. I felt I was, but I still wasn't walking with the Lord. And
shock and awe.
I didn't, it wasn't for lack of faith. It wasn't because I didn't know that he was real. I defended the truth of the Bible. I was just really mad at him. And I know. I could say it. I was really mad at him and I was really hurt. And it was his fault. Because I knew the Bible was true, I knew that he made me. I knew that he formed me. I knew that he knew my every part of me. And I knew that I still stuck out like a sore thumb. You're so good and you're so great and you're so big. And you did all of this. You did it on purpose. You've got to have it out for me. And I lived in this state of, I'm mad at you because obviously you're mad at me. For some wonderfully amazing reason that I have no idea of. And we used to have this guy, he would come every summer to the youth group that I was in. And he was great. He was good for the youth. He was very animated. And he was one of those, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know, I'm not gonna say that. He was good for the youth. He liked, his ministry time though was definitely focused on all the youth being like slain in the spirit. And but he used to do these like really cool things where he'd be teaching and he'd have like his staff and like interns or students or whatever kind of like in the seats with all of us. And he'd be talking and like mid him talking, they'd like jump up and start like responding to him. And what was happening was, and what the idea behind that, the visual behind that was, here I am preaching the word, you're having a really honest response, and it comes up, and you get it out, and all those youth in the room resonated with that response. And you timed it, it was timed in his teaching. Obviously, he knew it was going to happen, and he knew when it was going to happen. And so, he timed it that outburst would happen right before he starts to speak into that part of a youth's kid. It was a great little thing, but we all knew it was going to happen because it happened all the time. And I remember I was sitting there and probably had a pretty poor attitude. What teen doesn't in youth group, especially in youth camp at night? Like, I was there to go to Dorney Park. We were past that part, so I was no longer...
You were checked out.
I was checked out. But I'll never forget, this girl jumps up and she goes, and this was a plug for his book. Side note, brilliant plug for this guy's book. She jumps up and she goes, "Why is God so mad at me?" That was the name of his book. Mm. But I slouched in my chair, fully believing that he was true, good, and faithful for you, but angry at me and I was bound to be punished for it. I sat straight up. Because I was like, that's why you just asked the question that I want to know. Yeah. And I want to hear what this guy's answer is. And he goes on to this whole thing about how he's not mad at us, how he loves us. Like, oh, and he's just going, and for me, that could not have been more like.
It's like almost as if it was just you and him speaking.
Yeah. And I remember going up and getting prayer. I didn't go slay in the spirit because, I
rebel within.
I was a rebel within. I wasn't doing it. And so I stood my ground, but something happened that night. Something changed in me that night. But I definitely still didn't surrender to the Lord. I was in 8th grade. I was in a good deal of mess. And I don't remember why. I don't remember how, but all the mess came out. And it was there for everybody to see. And I was scared. Because I was being faced with, so I was 13. I was in 8th grade. I had laid under the radar most of my life, but I had all these deep internal issues. And they had definitely come out in my behavior here, there, everywhere. And I was in a problem. I was in a mess. And I knew that I was in the mess. And I desperately wanted it off my plate. And I'll never forget, my principal came in. I was in Bible class, first period Bible. And she comes in and she calls my name and she pulls me out to the hallway. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew that she was there to find out what was going on. I knew that the mess had bubbled over and it was now on her desk. And that was crazy because it was like layered. It picked up in youth group. But as you said, you grew up in the church too. In all of these parts of the story, there's so many places where our story intersected. Because if you are a Christian in the county that we live in, it's a very small one.
Yeah, it's about this small.
Yeah, and everybody knows each other. And so it had started at youth group and it had made its way to my principal. And I knew it though. And I was so desperate to get out from under it that she barely started to ask me. And I was like I just gave it all to her. And she was like, okay. And she immediately hits me with a potential for of legal ramifications. And I felt like this big. And I was like, I remember sitting in her office and being like, well, if my dad doesn't kill me, I guess I'm going to rot in prison. Like, I was like, I've got two options here and they're not looking great for me. And I hear this voice coming down the hallway that I didn't recognize, and I knew he was coming my way. And I was like, yeah, this is it. So they've called the police and they're here for me, and I'm going to leave this school and I'm going to leave in cuffs, and that's going to be how my story ends, and I just should make peace with it. And I'm going through like all of this, and I'm like, yeah. And my youth pastor turns the corner and I break down. At the time, my youth pastor, I had known him since he was really good friends with my dad. Actually, it was a fun little part of my life when I was really young. All my parents' friends, or at least a good portion of them, we all lived in the same apartment building. And for a split period, most of us lived on the same floor. So it was a lot like the show Friends.
Okay.
And so they would totally do, like, we would go over to one apartment and everybody would like hang out there. They'd like run home, put me down for bed, and then they'd go back and finish hanging out. And so he had known me since I was like little. And that had to be the most comforting face I could have seen. And I just broke down. And he sat with me and he was like, what's happening? Like, he was just like, what's happening? And he had never seen me this low. And he was like, what is going on? And I looked at him and I was like, I just laid it all out for him. I was like, God's mad at me. And I backed it out because, I gave out, I did all of what I did. And I felt like it was the only way to get anybody to actually love me. And that came, and I just laid it out for him. And he looked at me and he didn't say much. I think as a youth pastor, he was going through his, like, I also have to figure out how to clean this up. But so there was definitely a troubleshooting thing that was happening in his head. But he didn't say much. But he went, he was like, it's good for me to know that you're here in that place. As a youth pastor, he was like, I'm glad that I know this now. I speak into your life in a different capacity. But he went, I love you. And this is going to be a little bit of a rough journey to get you out of. But we're going to get you out of it, and it's going to be okay. And he goes, and I love you. He goes, but hear me right now. He went, God loves you. And you could have, like, the air was gone in that room. And he went, and I think that this situation is his best gift to you. And I was like, gift?
Wow, very poignant.
Gift. And so he leaves, and sure enough, my dad showed incredible self-control that day. And I walked this restorative journey with so many people that would hear about what was going on and would just come around. All these people that I thought all my life didn't care about me were suddenly just surrounding me. And there was one guy who, he was also really close to my parents, and he pulled me aside and he was like, I did the same thing. And I was like, what? He's like, I did the same thing because I thought the same thing. And he laid it out for me. I had never known that about him. And it's just this huge restorative journey just for me as a person. Because we weren't even talking about the Lord. It was just getting me through that season as a person. And I'll never forget, though, my mom picked me up one day. I had taken the bus home from school, and I was home. And she was picking me up because we were gonna go to church. And I get in the car and she goes, hey, so-and-so sent me a dream that their daughter had. And I went, what? And I knew. My heart immediately was like right here. And she went, yeah. I didn't have much I had relationship with the person that she named, but I didn't have a whole lot of relationship with that person's daughter.
Understood.
And so I was like, that's weird. And she goes, yeah. And so then she goes, and in the dream, you were standing on the edge of a cliff. And she went, and Gary was with you. And he was telling you to back up, to come closer, back up. And you were saying, you were moving away from him, going, no, I'm good. And he was going, no, back up. Like, you got to get off the edge, back up. And I went, no, I'm okay. And as I finished the word okay, my foot slipped and I fell into a mudslide. And she woke up. And so I'm in the car because I know that I'm out walking with the Lord. Total side note, I'm not walking with the Lord, but you, my parents, and anybody around me would not have necessarily known that. So this incident that had happened was huge. And that's why I think everybody had such a rush to my aid reaction to it, because it was really alarming for them. everybody thought I was fine. Everybody thought I loved the Lord. Everyone thought I was on a highway to a life with Jesus. Everyone thought I was the Esther of my generation. I was standing out. I wasn't going to be compromised. Like, everybody thought that. And then this happened. And so when this happened, it was like, for everyone around me, it was huge. So now when this dream happens, my mom's having a deeper realization of just how far off I am. Just how far away from home I've gone. And and I remember being in the car and kind of being like, okay, cool dream. I didn't care. Part of that restorative journey, I think because I had come out of hiding the fact that I wasn't really walking with the Lord, I had finally fallen into a place of, and now I don't care that you know. And so I had a very nonchalant attitude until she goes, so I sent that dream to like a couple women from the church. They're going to be praying for you. And I was like, you did what? You sent
Under whose authority and advisement did you make such a move?
I was just like, what? And she was like, yeah, no. You need prayer. And I was like, I need you to back up. And she was like, no, you need prayer, Caitlin. She was like, I'm afraid for your life. And I was like, whatever. Literally, I was like, whatever. And we pull into the church and I go to, now I've got a nasty attitude because I'm annoyed. You put all my stuff out there for everybody to see. And I go to get out of the car and she goes, wait. Get back in. Because I also knew enough not to, at that point.
Poke the bear?
Yeah. I get back in and this had to be like somewhere in the year. We were post-January. So we had to have been springish, I would say. And she goes, this summer is not going to be like your other summers have been. And I was like, excuse me? And she goes, they're going to be doing a 3-day-a-week intensive at EG for 6 weeks for the youth. And you're going to go to every day of it. She said, I've spoken to one of the current interns at EG, and you're going to spend the summer with her every day. Where she goes, you're going to go. And she went, and she just so happens to be planning the conference we're doing in August, so you're going to be helping her do that too. And I was like, whoa, all up in my summer like that. I was like, I've got plans. What are you doing? And she was like, no, this is what's going to happen. It's already happening. And I was like, oh, whatever. Like, I kind of had this, like, whatever. To this day, that intern, I know my youth pastor said that little moment was a gift from God. She was. She was the first person that I came in contact with that was older than me. Which, remember, that was always the thing that I was looking for. It was the only people I got along with. And she came from a super, super, super strict Hispanic Pentecostal background. Her dad was a pastor, and she grew up in that. By the time I got her, she was Jesus-loving, tatted. I mean, she was the rebel. And so there was a part of her that knew what was happening in me. She didn't shove Jesus at me at all. She didn't tell me how to live at all. She loved me completely in the exact spot that I was. She would see in places where I would do the leader's kid thing, where I had something I wanted to say, but I'd say is what I needed to say. And she'd get me alone and she'd be like, what were you actually thinking? Just tell me what you actually thought in that moment. And I was like, no. Like, it probably wasn't a good thought. She was like, what were you thinking? So she intentionally gave space for me to just be. For my real thoughts, my real issues, I'm angry, all of that. She just gave so much space for that. And that's how that summer went. I went with her everywhere. We happened to be doing our first Signs and Wonders, now BOC, but then Signs and Wonders camp. And I was helping out because I had to. And I was in just one room from where we are now, and I was praying for somebody. It was two sisters that had come, and they were real broken. They came from a really broken place. And I was praying for them, and the heart of the Father met us in that moment. And as I was ministering to them how loved they were, I was receiving it too. And I had multiple moments that summer like that. Multiple distinct moments like that.
Marking.
Yeah. And we finally get to this conference in August. It's the end of the summer. This is what my mom's not a strategic person. Strategy's not her strong point. I love her. Strategy's not her strong point. But this was well thought. She strategized this one. And in a short amount of time, because that all got established between when she got to work that day and when she picked me up after work. So I think the Holy Spirit really led her as she put all that together. And I get to this conference, and I'm sitting in the way back of the place. It's the last night. We've done all the work that there's to do. This is the last session. So all the volunteers are kind of, there's no more like, you got to prep this, prep that, whatever. And I'm sitting in the back. And teachers, speakers, teaching, doing his thing. And I was sitting there, and I had a moment where I kind of told the Lord, I was like, you've clearly been trying to get my attention all summer. You cornered me, so to speak. If you're, not just even if you're real, if you really care about me, I need you to meet me. And I need all of this to go away. Because I still carried a lot of all of that just locked up.
That emotion,
I needed to go away. And he made the altar call, and I slowly walked myself from the far, far back of the arena, and I just slowly walked right up the middle aisle. And I got church. It was a church. It was not an arena. It's so dramatic. But I walk up to the front, and I get there, and I put my 2 feet on the altar, and I start weeping. I hadn't cried at that point. I hadn't cried from the time that I was in my principal's office with my youth pastor to this moment. And I am weeping. No words. No feelings. I'm not thinking anything. I'm not feeling overwhelmed by anything. I'm just weeping. And I eventually sit on the floor, and somebody comes up from behind me, puts their hand on my shoulder, and says, he washes away many a things with the righteousness of your tears. Walked away. And I had this like, what? Righteous? I'd never heard that before. The righteousness of your tears. I still don't really grasp that, if I'm being fully honest. What was so pointed about that moment was that I had asked the Lord to wash it all away. And that was what this person came up and said. I didn't know the person. I've never seen that person again. I've never heard that voice again. I didn't see that person in the moment because they came up from behind me, but I've never heard that. I've never interacted with that person again. That was the only interaction I've ever had. Maybe they'll see this podcast and I'll finally get to talk to them again. That would be kind of cool. But I've never talked to them. I never had a conversation. So it was so pointed. It was so real. It was so like, I said this at the back of the room. You said this at the front of the room. This is it. And she walked away, and the only thing I could utter was, I say yes. And I stood up, and I went, and I found my parents. I grabbed them. I said, I don't want to go back. I was in a Christian school, but the school I was in was very small. And it was basically like, your behavior is not tolerated in any of these public schools, so we're going to put you into this private school. They're absolutely going to graduate you, and that's why you're here. So the behavior was just out of, the influence, it was just out of control. And it was on such a small scale that it was almost amplified. Like, it would almost be better to be, like, large and spread. But it was just, like, it was so concentrated. And so I went to my parents, and I said, I don't want to go back to school. I mean, my dad was like, well, you've got 3 years left. So, like, that's not, like, he kind of was like, I love the sentiment, but no. And I was like, no, I'm not going back. I need to be homeschooled. And he was like, what? And I was like, I need to be homeschooled, and I'm not going back. So we could talk about that. But on the other side, like, I was like, so, like, I understand that you have, like, your issues with that, but we'll just sidestep that for now. We'll get back to it. But I'm not going in 2 weeks. I refuse. On the other hand, I said, and I want to do the internship at EG. I want to do the full-time internship. And my dad was like, Kaylin, you've got like studies, you've got like stuff. And I was like, I don't think you're understanding. And I laid it out for him. I said, the Lord just radically changed my heart and my life. And I'm not going back into an environment where I'm going to put that at risk. I need you to understand that. And I know myself. I will go back into that environment. I will forget everything that happened in these last 3 months, and I will be moved. I'm not willing to be moved. So I need to be homeschooled, and I need to take this internship. And my dad was like, I will call the principal on Monday. We will withdraw you. And I will figure out how to get you in the internship. I don't even know if it's open. I was 14. I don't even know if it's open to you, but if it is, we will find a way. And so I did the internship. It was 8 months. It was 40 hours. I was homeschooled. One of the staff members here homeschooled me. It's actually funny because I now teach other homeschoolers with her.
Yeah.
It's really awesome. And I love telling the kids that because they kind of do like a,
No.
what? Yeah, they like freak out.
Yeah.
And so I would come in. My mom would drop me off on her way to work at 8 a.m. I'd cram as much schoolwork as I could from 8 to 10. My internship would start up at 10 with whatever I was doing. I would do that all day, and then I would finish off with whatever schoolwork I had to get done, and I did both. And then I figured out that that was what I was supposed to do. I figured out that that's who I was. I figured out that it wasn't a ministry thing, but who I was intrinsically connected to who he was. And if I wanted to continue to find out who I was, apart from all of the struggle that I had growing up, trying to figure that out, it needed to be in a place where I could be so closely connected to him all the time. And when I finished my internship, because of child labor laws, I couldn't come on staff right away. So they I think I did like a part-time hybrid thing for a while where I was still doing schoolwork, but I did my schoolwork in the prayer room. I'd bring my backpack and I would sit in the lobby. I'd get taught, I'd learn concepts, I'd figure them out, and then I'd go do 6-7 hours in the prayer room, get all my schoolwork done, and sit with Jesus. That's what my life looked like from the time that I was 14 to the time I was 18. And I turned 18 when I was finally going to be able to stop doing this, and I joined full-time staff, and that's where I've been ever since. And in all of that, the Lord had to walk me through so many times. He had to walk me through, like, the idea that because he has me in ministry doesn't mean that I am ministry. Because he has me in ministry doesn't mean that my yes to him is involved in ministry, but that he has very intentional and purposeful things that he wants to use my life for. And so the yes that I gave him in 2013 when I say yes, that was for whatever it looked like. And this is just the form that it took up until now.
Okay.
Where it'll go, who knows? My yes was that my heart was surrendered to him for whatever he wanted me to do, and that I was committed to preserving that, to protecting that. And that's how I found him.
And you're clearly, and I'm not asking to you share what you're willing to, how much, what have you. I'm not asking for you to delve deep, but so you were at this point, your yes at 13, and now 18 forward, fully committed to the Lord.
Yeah.
Your heart, your gifting, your time, your money, everything is his.
And those 5 years were formative. Like 13 to 18 that I gave him that yes, there's not enough thank you that I could give him for the way that he came around me in those 5 years and formed me. I'm talking mentors that came. I'm talking things that I was tables I got to sit at 16 that people don't sit at until they're 40. And not because I had anything to give to that table, but the opportunity to sit at that table and hear things I experienced, dynamics I had to work through that typically you don't work through in your teen years. It was all a gift. And I believe it was a gift. I call it an accelerated young adulthood. At 13, I walked into what most 19-year-olds walk into. And the Lord accelerated all of that for me. That by 18, I would be where most 25-year-olds are. And I don't say that from a place of arrogance. I went through so much in those 5 years. If I look at it as anything else, I'll get discouraged. I went through so much, but he was so present that it was pointed acceleration.
And would it be would it be fair to say that that was your coming to faith moment, or was there still yet a moment in which you said, okay?
No, that was it. That was the moment. I think it was that moment. I've had so many more since then, but I could say that was the moment that that's the one that I can remember. That's the one I can point to. That's the one that I can see all of those little stories leading to that very moment with him. Yeah.
I think a piece of why I kind of started our conversation the way I did is because I've heard different iterations of the story. Obviously, we have a finite amount of time that we have to unpack it with those that are eavesdropping.
Yeah.
But this is, I said what I said to you because the thing is, you alluded to it in that you were 13 being confronted with things that a 19-year-old would. You know what I mean? And I think that it aided greatly to your maturation, not only as a young lady, but as a person walking in the faith. You definitely, you put your heart on display. You gave it to the Lord. You said, here. You kept your eye on it in that, you know, I see it, but you definitely didn't give it ownership in that you said, here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to Indian give, as it were. I'm not gonna, like, once this is it. Yeah. And then you walked it till you're 18. The very thing, it's funny, moms, the very thing your mom said you're going to do until you're 18.
I signed up for.
And basically, exactly, turned 18, you're like, okay, this is what it is. And 27 years old, walking in the faith, you're ministering to the very group of people that you yourself didn't find either a good connection with or a belonging to. You're pouring into that generation now, today. You stand before the presence of God as an intercessor, as a worship leader. You've hit certain markers that, like, even I didn't hit at your age. I didn't get to figure out a lot of this till I call it the second part of my life, as it were, and I'm still figuring things out. So now that you are where you're at, is there a singular thing, moment in time, that you can say, because we all struggle. So it's not to say that you've been perfect since then, but is there something specifically that you can say, there was this moment and that's all it was, because I didn't give it more than that, because my heart was still committed to the one I made the commitment to at 13 when I gave all that up? Is there like a specific that you're willing to discuss? Or, you know, and again, doesn't have to be great detail, but is there like something that you can say, there was this, but that's all it was. It was just that moment, because I look at everything that took place to this point and I was just not willing to, that's it.
I don't think I can boil that down to a moment. I can point to a time period, though. I want to say from the beginning of 2021 to the end of 2022 were rough. Part of that accelerated young adulthood came with a lot of boundaries that were made for me. For so many reasons. One, so young, in ministry, certain things that are just okay and not okay. And those boundary lines kept me. They aided. This is part of what I think was a gift from the Lord too, was that because I was in a place where he could accelerate that, I was also in a place where I could have these firm boundary lines of what was okay. And I'm talking like, you know, at 18, I didn't go out partying, because at 18, I was saying yes to Jesus.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's a part of that due to where he put me, I could not say yes to that. I couldn't give into that. I couldn't entertain it even in those later teen years. My early 20s, I walked ever so slightly, stepped away from ministry for a period of time. Orchestrated and ordained by the Lord, I look at it now and I say 100% he led me there. And I know why. I needed to learn that what I was telling you, that ministry isn't my ministry and my yes to the Lord aren't the same thing.
The same.
And as a 13-year-old, even as an 18-year-old, I think I knew that, but there was a part of it that I had to live it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of dropped a little bit of the capacity that I was serving in ministry as much. Boundary lines fly up, and now what I was once boxed into a good, safe pen for my, I think of it like a horse. When I once had a horse pen that was safe and was good for me, that kept me protected, it was now gone and it was just open field. And not only could I wander to wherever I wanted, but I didn't have anybody looking at me, telling me that I couldn't wander there.
There was no safeguard.
And so, and so there was about a 2-year period, I think, and no, I believe, where the Lord allowed me to walk away a little bit. He allowed me to stray a little bit. He allowed me to tap things that I had not tapped before. He allowed me to, there were certain desires is a strong word. There were certain temptations that I had in my heart, well, desires of the flesh that I had in my heart that I was always suppressing because I was here. In that time period, I had the freedom to wander into those things. And I did. In that 2-year period. Not fully, because my yes to the Lord, again, it was the Lord has never been something that I could get away from.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And so it was very much like,
choir.
Even though my parents could see that I was struggling in those 2 years, there was still very much, you live in my house, you're going to church.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't matter what I was doing, I was showing up at church on Sunday.
Correct.
And I had enough from those years of being in ministry, as young as I was, the word was in me, the theology was in me, the belief, I couldn't run away from it. And so in those 2 years, I definitely wandered, but it was a tug of war, and it was definitely stronger on one side. And I definitely hit a moment. I had like a, what are you doing moment? Why are you playing? Why is your hand in the fire, and why are you playing with it? And why is the heat not alarming to you? What are you doing? And I had this moment of like, where I think I realized that the mercy of the grace of the Lord was to allow that. The mercy of the Lord was to cover me in it. To this day, he's not laid that bare. He's not put me in a position where I've had to lay all of that bare.
Correct.
He's covered me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it put me in this situation where he showed me mercy and he showed me grace that a usual teen that'll grow up in the church and come back around, they hit 18, they wander off, and around 21, they come back. I had the opposite. 13 to 20 was super, super strong. Then there was that period of like, wait, there is this side that I haven't really been able to touch. Touched it and went, I didn't like that. Yeah. I didn't like that. And not only did I not like it, I had this realization of I grieve the Holy Spirit when I do it. To look away from him is to grieve him. I couldn't live that. I couldn't bear that. And so I very quickly was like, I know too much. I've seen too much. It reminds me of this, it was a moment that, it was a Sunday that Gary was speaking. I'll never forget it, but he was speaking and he was like, you could tell me that I heard wrong. You could tell me that I felt wrong, but you cannot tell me what I've seen. And I had this own moment in my head where I was like, I could reason away Bible, I could reason away Jesus, but I can't reason away what I've seen, and I've seen him in my life. So I had to have another moment of like, yeah, let's put that down. I want to go home. And I did.
All right. So we come to the part in every episode I like to ask all my guests this question, and no tailor-made answer. It's your answer. It's off the cuff. But encountering what you've encountered, sharing what you've shared, experiencing what you've had to this point, Holy Spirit filled, God-fearing, loving the Lord, loving others. If there's one thing, statement, sentence, word, what have you, that you can say to your former self or anyone else for that matter, that can relate or resonate with what you shared, or anyone else on this channel for that matter, what would you say?
My innate answer to that, nothing. I wouldn't say anything. She needed all of it. I wouldn't say anything. But if I had to say something, it would be, he's ordained every single step. You need all of it. That's what I would say. I have nothing to say to you. You need all of what you're about to experience. Because there are things that I would love a redo on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But I wouldn't be here. I would not be sitting in this seat if I got a redo at any point. And I look at my life now, change nothing. Change nothing. Just keep going forward. That's it.
Hey, I can appreciate it. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for bearing your heart. Thank you for walking this life out together. We're co-workers. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. We're really good friends. We love one another. And I just want to say thank you so much. I've actually been looking forward to this interview. And you wowed and amazed. So thank you so much. Love you. And yeah, see you on the other side.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I pray that episode blessed you. If you enjoyed that, please tune in every month as we'll have a new voice and a new episode. Until next time, God bless.